So we need 3 hours.
So before we jump into the PowerPoint, I'm just going to quickly read you the recommendation that came out of our last meeting. The PC Housing Work Group continues to recommend grossly simplifying residential uses. CodeNext Draft 3 continues a very complex system of uses that perpetuates loopholes and dysfunctional uses and relies on unusable definitions of attached and detached. We believe the easier path is to adopt our recommendation and rewrite the residential uses while allowing FAR to be used equally throughout the site, with a limitation only on the second floor of the rear 1/3 of the site limited to 550 square feet per current code. We also recommend that McMansion, which has been completely unraveled in CodeNext, either be restored as it is today or a task force be assembled to review the design standards with stakeholders and city review staff. While our work group has worked with members of the Home Builders Association to identify potential simplifications of the code, no final recommendation is available at this time. Regarding subdivision, we recommend that most areas be translated to zones that maintain current minimum lot sizes, with lower lot sizes being made available in new zones. We further recommend that new zones be available for use in greenfield development and as a tool to implement adopted small area plans. If we assume that our recommendations will not be accepted, then we have a long list of changes to specific provisions of CodeNext. So we're just looking at the main intentions of this CodeNext process: to simplify the current code, to increase affordability, to create more predictability, and to respect neighborhood character. This is the recommendation for the uses. You all saw this in our previous slide, but our recommendation is to remove duplexes, single-family attached, and accessory dwelling units. The other two are not in Draft 3, and replace that with just single-family, two-family, multifamily, and used dwelling units. This allows for a huge reduction in the complexity of the residential code, and it also allows for the FAR to be used throughout the site with no hierarchy. So that kind of covers that main part of our recommendation. If that doesn't go forward, which we've met a lot of resistance through meetings with staff and through consultants, a lot of support and a lot of resistance of trying to figure out how to do that right now. So we've taken some time to look at Draft 3 specifically if we don't move that recommendation forward. One spot that we had seen, for better or for worse, is that it seems as though R3 lots inadvertently allow 4 units. If you have a 7,000 square foot lot that's zoned R3, you divide it into 3,500 lots, put a single family attached, and then each of them gets an ADU. This allows for 4 units on a R3, but it does allow for small units, and R3 is geared towards small units, so it has potentially pros and cons. It's just a matter of making sure that this is an intentional outcome or not. So we had recommended clarifying the definition of lot or ADU as a use with single family attached. James, do you want to speak to this one?
So on this, this is basically showing what could be possible if you had like a 10,000 square foot lot and you go through what gets subdivided. And you have a lot of neighborhoods that have larger lots. So under, say, an R2C zoning, you have a 10,000 square foot lot that could be subdivided into 5,000, and you can actually get duplexes, or you can get you get a duplex, or you could get a house with an ADU. The thing is that can be further subdivided, and you could get these single-family attached products. Now, the intent on the single-family attached was that a single-family attached looks like a duplex. It's a single form. So what we're looking at as you go to the next form, you can see how they look like the row house or shotgun-style homes with a little connection. The issue right now is that the definition of how you define attach is so loose that you end up having these shotgun forms on that street scale. And if in our Imagine Austin and in what we're, for our neighborhoods, if we are trying to keep that residential scale that's there, and the street scale that's there, then the concern is that it can be abused and you end up creating these forms where you have medium and larger street forms mixed in with these shotgun forms with this funny little fake connection. I mean, and we've seen it that it ends up being like just some, if you look at the picture up on the top right, you can see that that's a connection. It's just a bunch of, I don't know, it looks like pieces of steel tubing just kind of set across it and say, hey, look, it's attached. Well, it's still two forms. It will change the neighborhood character by going that route. Now, if it can be cleaned up, then we can still be able to have forms that do fit with the neighborhood. And so we have an approach on how to define attached, but again, that's been attempted in the past and has been convoluted as well. But we think we have a proposal.
Okay. So the next thing that we looked at was the minimum lot sizes. Right now we're going from a minimum lot size of 5,750 to 5,000 in the R zones. This means that anything that was previously could be subdivided at 11.5 thousand now can be subdivided at 10,000. So we looked at how many lots does that affect, and we found that about 44,000 lots would become available for subdivision. That's 30% of the R2 and R3 lots. The minimum width is also reduced from 50 to 45. What happens with this, what we think could happen with this is unintended consequences of increasing demolitions. So some options that we had thought of was to either revert all of the minimum lot size back to 5,750, revert the minimum width back to 50 feet, and create new R2 and R3 zones that would allow for this smaller lot size so that we could use those appropriately in greenfield developments, but also through smaller area planning. James?
And I wanted to also bring up that, the minimum lot width reduction from 50 foot for 45, as well as the lot dimensions going down to 5,000, we see a lot of flag lots coming through. And if we consider that currently, if you have 65-foot frontage, because you have to have a 15-foot frontage in order to do any lot. So if you have 65 foot, then I could subdivide to a flag lot. Now that we bumped this thing down to 45 feet, all I need is 60 feet to do flag lots. You add that with smaller lot sizes, then we exponentially increases the opportunities to continue subdividing if you add flag lot ability as well as smaller lot subdivisions. So it's something to really consider.
And by recommending the creation of these other zones that have a smaller minimum lot size, we're recognizing that these smaller lot sizes could be appropriate for different transition zones or for different neighborhoods, but we don't want to use them blanket across the city and inadvertently increase the number of demolitions and subdivisions. And allowing standard notes. So, FAR exemptions. As it stands under McMansion, there are, I've listed out kind of some of the FAR exemptions that we have currently under McMansion. Under D3, they've increased those exemptions. So now all of the porches on all the different stories are exempt. All of basements are exempt with or without within or without the footprint. Attics are exempt, all stories below grade, and all parking facilities. The problem with this is that none of those are clearly defined in draft 3, and so it leaves the door wide open for an abuse of exemptions, basically. The problem with McMansion exemptions is that they're often complicated to calculate, and what we've seen in the past with the cases of people closing in carports and inadvertently exceeding their FAR, and the heartburn that causes them and the BOA. So if the intention of CodeNext is to reduce the complexity, then we don't feel that adding more exemption is helping that. We think that more exemptions are adding to the complexity. They're adding to the overall cost of calculations. They're making it less predictable because then you have to hire somebody to calculate all of these exemptions for you and make sure that you've got it. And then if you accidentally make some of that space habitable, or intentionally make some of that space habitable without realizing that, then it pushes you over your FAR, then the homeowner pays the cost of that as well. So the options that we came up with were to eliminate all exemptions and increase the FAR to 0.45. So we looked at some of our own projects to see what the actual FAR would be if we had eliminated all of the exemptions on those, and on average, we saw an increase of 0.05. So we were saying if you get rid of all those exemptions, then your FAR is clear. Whatever you've got built is what counts towards it. Then we talked about the option of perhaps leaving in all of the D3 exemptions and decreasing the FAR to 0.3 to balance out the additional entitlements that you're creating through those exemptions. Or, of course, just leave the McMansion FAR definition. We also suggested creating a task force to look at the ramifications of changing from McMansion to D3. As part of the raising the FAR to 0.45 and eliminating all exemptions, we also talked about leaving a first floor porch exemption on the street sides. Yes?
So I want to mention, so I think all of you guys got the email from Chris Allen, and he mentioned that under current code, like what he calculated with the way that it is currently with all the exemptions, trying to push everything in.
Currently in draft 3.
In draft 3, he got 0.8 FAR, which is dramatically different from even the projects we are able to pull off today. So we got to do something about this.
So some other quick items that we had talked about as a commission. We would like to see the 5-foot porch setback encroachment retained on corner lots. This is something that came before our planning commission within the last, I want to say 2 years, maybe even less. And we had voted on adding that across the board, so we'd like to see that in draft 3. We'd like to see articulation removed. The front articulation and corner lot side yard articulation requirements. I think everybody can read through these, but basically the articulation component is that it adds complexity to the drawings, it increases the cost of projects, and the way they've got it called out in here, it's onerous. Flag lots we're suggesting that they continue with the variance that's currently required under current code until we have a better understanding of the impact that the new flag lots will create. Pools and water features, we'd like to allow them to be in setbacks up to the property line as it is allowed today, and to regulate those under the landscaping standards. And then I'm gonna skip fences and come back to James on it, but the front yard impervious cover. Right now there's a restriction that on just the front yard's impervious cover that we think is onerous and doesn't allow for the flexibility that you may need in order to protect the trees or to deal with steep lots and slopes, and we feel like designers need more options and less restrictions. Do you want to talk about the fences?
Yeah, and so looking at the fence regulations, I think it looks like it's very different from what we see today. Like right now, you drive in a neighborhood, you see fences. What they are proposing today would actually put quite a few properties out into non-conforming status. So right now, under the new draft 3, fences are not allowed within 20 feet of the corner of a property line that's on the intersection, and that includes alleys. So if you're on an alley on the backside, you can't have a fence for 20 feet from your property line, and same thing if you're on a corner lot as well. We're thinking that's way too restrictive, especially when it comes to any type of safety or privacy. So we're wanting to continue where we are today. So allow fences, go into the corners, as long as there's the adequate visibility. And then any place that talks about 3-foot regulation, that we want to make sure that should be a 4-foot regulation due to a lot of safety standards that set fences already at 4 feet. So we don't want to deal with compliancy issues, whenever these things could come up. At the front property line, the only thing about like today's code regarding fences is at the front property line. I think right now you can have 6 feet, or you get 8 feet if you get through a variance. But we're thinking that today's for the front property line should be at 4 feet, so that way it's more neighborly as well. You could still get the privacy as well as the the safety and protection. 4 feet up to 5 feet if it's sloping. If there's lots that are challenged, whether, for instance, if there's a street coming right into you and there's headlights, if there's anything like that, then sure, there's room for variance. But that's something that is available to anybody right now anyway.
So then the other piece that we talked about was we had the presentation from the mapping presentation on the D3 map, and in that there was a conversation that neighborhood plan infill tools and design tools were baked into the mapping. So we would like to formally request more information on what's baked in and how, what's not and why, and we'd also like to make a push for technology being used as a way that you could potentially continue with some of these tools, but have them be more easily accessible, both for homeowners and for consultants. The only other piece with the FAR that I forgot to mention is that currently in our current code, the lot size is 5,750, and then the FAR minimum is 2,300 because that's 5,750 times 0.4, which is the allowable FAR. If we reduce the lot size to 5,000, then the FAR minimum should also be reduced to 5,000 times 0.4, which is 2,000. That's just math. That's it.
Okay, and a lot of the discussions that we have are still ongoing. We've recently met with some people in the building community, and we talked about the engineer's letter as well as building height, as well as possible tweaks in FAR depending, for R3 or R4. So that is still in ongoing conversations. We feel like we're getting some headway on that, and as we get some more resolution on that, then we'll be presenting that. But we still have quite a few things we're talking about, even as well as residential parking areas, things like that. So something to mention about the infill tools was that I think what staff has mentioned was that the infill tools, they said, some neighborhoods thought it was a good idea, so we decided just to put it in everywhere. Well, there's a lot of issues with infill tools causing things to become non-conforming. And also some of the infill tools, for instance, with parking placement, that is being placed everywhere. When you add the impervious cover regulation for the front yard, as well as parking placement, as well as the sizes of the driveways, it's very difficult to be able to put even the required parking in certain areas. But that's another thing that we're going to be discussing on how all this stuff should shake out.
Who's got questions?